if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
We still have a lot of unanswered questions in the aftermath on the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump from this past Saturday, and we want to talk about it. This is a horrific shooting that left the Republican nominee for president with a damaged ear, 2 people critically injured, 57-year-old David Dutch, 74-year-old James Copenhaver, although now they are in stable condition. And sadly, this also led to the death of firefighter 50-year-old Corey Competore, who was apparently shielding his family from the gunfire when he was killed. It's just heartbreaking to think about what happened here. And authorities, they have identified the shooter, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, a Pennsylvania resident, as we reported on our previous sidebar on the shooting. Reporting indicates Crooks was a loner, had been bullied in school. He had tried but failed to make his school's rifle team because apparently he was a bad shot. The FBI currently leading up this investigation, looking into this shooting, and at this point, reporting indicates the shooter had used an AR-style weapon, a .556 rifle. Reporting indicates that the firearm was purchased legally by Crooks' father, although it's not clear how he was actually able to gain access to the gun. The shooter was positioned about 130 to 150 yards away on a nearby roof, this seemingly on the outside perimeter of that rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The shooting took place about 6 minutes into Trump's speech. And after the shooting, law enforcement discovered rudimentary explosives in Crooks' car that was parked near the rally. This included an apparent IED. They also discovered bomb-making materials in his home as well. And apparently Crooks also had a remote-controlled detonator on his body as well. So it makes you think about how much more destructive and lethal this event could have been. But we have so many unanswered questions about what led up to this shooting, how it happened. And so with that, I want to bring on right now retired FBI agent and attorney Bobby Chacon to talk more about it. Bobby, thanks so much for coming on. First, let me just say, tell our audience why it's so important that the FBI is taking the lead on this investigation.
Well, first of all, the FBI has a lead on all investigations involving assassinations or attempted assassinations of presidents or any other federal authority, federal official. That's the FBI's jurisdiction. That's what we do. Here, we're talking about 2 kind of separate investigations that people shouldn't confuse. One is of the shooter, his actions, how he got to do it. The other is the internal Secret Service or more government-wide investigation into the security lapses. Those are 2 separate investigations. Secret Service is left to do their own internal audit about how this happened. The FBI is just looking at the shooter, his motivations, and how he was able to carry it out up until the point, he pulled that trigger. So those are 2 separate issues. They kind of do overlap and merge a little bit. But the FBI is always in charge of any investigation of violence towards government officials.
And before we get into the first question that I'm going to ask is about the motivation here, or the apparent motivation, the FBI has resources that another agency doesn't?
Well, I think so. I mean, we're the largest government agency in terms of a budget and, the CIA has a bigger budget, but I'm talking about manpower, the number of agents, and the budget we have for investigations. Sure, we're the largest federal agency to do that. Other, DEA focused on drugs, ATF on guns, but we cover everything. So the FBI does have that broader jurisdiction and therefore broader resources.
Let me ask you the most basic question when we talk about unanswered questions. Why, if it's true that he is the shooter, Mr. Crooks, why would he purportedly do this? And how important is determining motive here? Because I think that's an important point, right? How important is it to understand the motivation surrounding it? And what could the possible motivation be here?
Well, I mean, Jesse, look, without any political assassination or attempted assassination that this is, there's an implied motivation. He wanted Donald Trump dead because he didn't want Donald Trump to become the next president. I think that's kind of an implied thing. I mean, he might have hated Donald Trump for other reasons, but it's hard to see that he took this action for any other reason other than he wanted to stop Donald Trump from becoming the next president. I mean, he might have had a grievance with Trump for other past actions that Trump may have taken while he was president the first time. But this is a political assassination, and normally those things have that implied motive of you want to stop this person's political ambitions.
Well, this is why it's strange, because CNN is reporting that investigators have kind of hit a roadblock. They've been looking at his phone, they've been looking at his computer searches, they've searched the home, they've interviewed friends, family, and they can't piece together a definitive motive. There's reportedly nothing out of the ordinary. They find an interest in coding and gaming, but they can't seem to find any kind of political ideation, any religious motivation, nothing, no clue that would lead anybody to suspect he was about to do this. Do you find that very unusual to see that?
It is very, because like I said, along with the implied motivation of a political assassination or attempted assassination, you do normally find a lot of political ideology in the person's lifestyle and his background and his conversations with people and his associations with people and organizations. And so normally they are ideologues and they are hell-bent on carrying out an act of violence, a political act of violence. It's normally very apparent from looking at their background. And here they're not finding that. So, there's that, and like I said, there's an implied motivation, but it could be, he was just out for fame. But oftentimes we also see indications of that in his background. He wanted to become famous because, because killing Trump obviously would make him famous. Or, because we had different motivations. When Hinckley shot Reagan, it was because of his fascination with Jodie Foster. It thought he would be famous. The person that killed John Lennon actually was a big John Lennon fan. So sometimes these people have these ideas in their head that this act, I'm going to carry out this act, and then I would be viewed as this other person or in this way. So, that's more of a mental health expert question. Like, could it, and what is in his background might indicate that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, a political motivated attack normally has some kind of, he would be more active politically, either online or in person, and we're just not finding that right now.
And it could be that he also potentially had a grudge against other people at the rally, because if you take it, obviously the number of shots that were fired, the people who were injured, someone who was killed, and if the explosives in the car, which he could potentially have detonated and harmed a lot more people, it's difficult to know who the exact target was or why. But here's the thing, if you were to watch him before this, you'd say something was up with this guy. Why? Because CNN is also reporting that Crooks had visited a shooting range the day before the rally. Apparently he was a member there. Then goes to a Home Depot where he purchases a ladder. Then goes to a local gun store in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, buys 50 rounds of ammunition. Apparently drives to the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, parks the car, uses the ladder to get to the roof of the adjacent American Glass Research Building, sets up and opens fire. So Bobby, when we talk about what his motivation was, and we see law enforcement trying to set up a timeline here, what do you take away from that?
Well, the young man was very determined. Clearly, he's determined to carry out this attack with all of these steps he's taking. What we call pre-event planning and pre-event activity, which begs the question on why we're not seeing more rhetoric, more associations in his background that would have led somebody to believe that he was going to do this, because he's a pretty determined individual, as your description rightly spells out. And so someone that determined is so motivated, it's hard not to think that, you wouldn't see some motivation of that in other parts of his life, either online or talking to friends or mentioning something to family members. If he was able to keep all of this rage and carrying a gun to a rooftop and shooting into a crowd, and practicing the day before. I mean, you are determined. There's a lot of rage there. And to have that rage not manifest itself in prior behavior or prior acts or prior discussions is really unusual.
At the time of this recording, Bobby, no evidence about how he knew how to make explosive devices. That's not an easy thing. And again, if they haven't found searches online where he, talk about how to make these devices, I find that weird too.
Yeah, that's the first thing I would think of. Look at a search history. Is he searching Google for how to make an IED or something like that? Now, I mean, our guys are digging into it. Our forensic examiners, our computer forensic examiners are good at that. So, if he was able to use, this was a young man, he knows computers. He's of the age that he grew up with them. And so if he was using some kind of dark web to hide his search histories and stuff. Our guys usually find that stuff, and so hopefully something like that happens, because I don't know where. I mean, unless you somehow got a hold of a bomb making manual, and I don't know how you do that either. Obviously, stuff's readily available on the internet, which leads a trail. If you're not finding that trail, I don't know how a 20-year-old young man without prior military training or any kind of training would know to get those things and how to even crudely assemble them.
Again, at the time of this recording, we haven't seen evidence of how he figured out how to do that unless he searched it somewhere else, not on his own devices. But you mentioned there's two parts of this, right? So there's two parts of it. There's what do we know about the shooter, the suspected shooter, and what do we know about the shooting itself and why it happened? That's the second part, and that's what I want to talk about. Because there are a lot of questions, and there are a lot of questions that have been put on the Secret Service. The spotlight has been put on the Secret Service. There's an investigation not just by the FBI, Congress, Department of Homeland Security. And the first question is, how is this American Glass research building where Crooks purportedly shot from, why was it not secured, Bobby? It had a line of sight to where Trump would be speaking. Isn't there an advance team to check this out?
Done that, and they were probably there on the ground, I don't know, a week or 10 days in advance is the usual. And they would have, anybody, that does threat assessments would have seen that as a vulnerability, that high ground with direct line of sight, not that far a distance. You don't have to be an expert marksman to hit somebody with a rifle from that distance. And so it's really, the million-dollar question is first of all, how the perimeter wasn't set out further, why that building wasn't part of the inner perimeter, that anybody getting to that building would have to go through security checks, through the magnetometers. That's the first thing. Why wasn't that included in the outer perimeter? It was a very tight perimeter. And the second is, even if it's outside the perimeter, and make no mistake, Secret Service, and I've worked with them on different events, they come in and they take, what they say goes. When you have a former president or a current president, they don't play well with others. They pretty much set the rules. And if they told local police officers, look, that's outside the perimeter, but we want your guys on top of that because they lend resources, then the cops would have had somebody on top of that. Now, what we heard from the Secret Service director, I think, in an interview, was that they had people inside the building. They were securing. You don't secure a building from the inside, not a short building like that. And this is not the Texas School Book Depository. So you can't secure it from the inside. I mean, the benefit of that building to any adversary is the high ground, is the roof. And so you had to have people up there.
Yeah.
The fact that it was sloped, the service director even said it was sloped, so there was a safety factor. No, it wasn't sloped that much, number one. Number two, friends of mine who are snipers, they're trained to get themselves into very uncomfortable situations and stay there for long periods of time.
And by the way, the Secret Service snipers were on a slope roof that day. So that's the question. But here's the thing I don't understand. Wouldn't the shooter have had to have known beforehand where the best position to set up was to kill Donald Trump, and had to assume that that building wouldn't be secure? Otherwise, he'd be going in, there's no way I'd be able to set up there. I'm sure it's going to be blocked off. I'm sure there's going to be people up there. It was almost as if he knew that was where to set up.
Yeah, that's a question that I had, and I hope obviously the investigation is probably looking into that, whether or not he did even more pre-event surveillance. Was he there when they were doing the survey? Was he there the day or two before so he could see where the perimeter was being set up? And he knew that building was outside the security perimeter. So yes, and the fact that he brought a ladder leads me to believe that he knew somebody might not be up there, and that's disturbing to me because that stuff that's why it should be inside the security perimeter. That's why that stuff should remain kind of secretive. Now, also, I've heard reports that people saw him kind of acting strange outside the magnetometer. So I wonder if he actually had the thought of, maybe I could get in, maybe I could sneak in. Let's see what kind of security they're thinking. Maybe I can get into the perimeter. And when he realized he couldn't, then went back and retrieved the ladder. And maybe this was kind of a backup plan. I don't know.
Interesting. I'll get to that in a second. I want to go back to this building in terms of who's securing it, because we're getting kind of this. Everybody's pointing the finger at one another because was it local law enforcement who was supposed to secure it? Was it Secret Service? And I say that because Secret Service spokesperson Anthony Guglielmi said that it was the Butler Township Police Department and the Butler County Sheriff's Office job to secure that building. But the Butler County DA, Richard Goldlinger, told NBC News they had meetings in the week prior. The Secret Service ran the show. They were the ones who designed who did what. In the command hierarchy, they were top. They were number one. To me, the whole thing is under the jurisdiction of the Secret Service, and they will delineate from there. So who was in charge of securing the building, Bobby? Was it Secret Service or local law enforcement?
Well, like he said, and I agree with him, Secret Service is in charge of the entire security apparatus, and they coordinate stuff. So, in other words, if they wanted somebody on that roof and they didn't have the manpower, they would have assigned, okay, Butler County or whoever, or state police, whoever, you've got to be on that roof. And they would be part of the plan. And what normally you do is before the protectee even arrives on scene, you go down your checklist. Is this done? Is that done? Hey, there's nobody on that roof. This person's supposed to be on the roof. Where are they? That's Secret Service. They should be going down their checklist and going, okay, that roof needs to be secured. It's part of the plan. I don't see anybody up there. You have to go. It's like a pilot going through a checklist pre-flight. You go through your checklist and you go down all the vulnerabilities. That roof needs to be covered. There's nobody up there. Where are they? The protectee is not coming out until the person's on the roof. Now, who is supposed to be on there? I don't know. But Secret Service certainly was in charge of making sure whoever that was up there before the protectee comes out.
And even if it's outside the perimeter, shouldn't they keep a careful eye on that building throughout, right? I mean, the idea of even if it's outside the perimeter, you don't have to go through a magnetometer necessarily to get in there. Shouldn't that be a place where you station at least one person, or you have your snipers keep a central eye on it? I'm sure they're looking past 130, 150 yards, but if that's a building so close, shouldn't that have been remain a focus?
There should have been somebody up there, whether it was state police, Butler County, or Secret Service. Secret Service was in charge of making sure somebody was up there, no matter who was supposed to be up there. And I would like to look at their operational plan and see who they assigned to be up there. And then prior to the protectee coming on stage, why the checklist wasn't looked at and said, there's somebody missing up on that roof. We need to get somebody on that roof. We're not bringing them out until that's done. Now, I think that when you look at the video of the counter sniper who took the shot, they're looking in the direction of that building. And I'm pretty sure that's because they're hearing radio traffic saying somebody's on the roof, because there was some chaotic situation over there. You saw the video of people saying, a woman saying, he's on the roof, he's got a gun. I'm sure that was put over comms. When you look at that roof, it's sloped away. And I don't think the counter sniper guys could actually see the shooter yet. He was crawling up. He was on his belly. And then what happened was, an officer confronted him and then retreated. He turned around with his rifle towards the officer. What that did was make the guy move quicker. Then he popped up really fast over that peak and started shooting. That's when the guy on the sniper's person, because you see them looking there and they're probably saying, I see the roof, I don't see anybody. I see the roof, I don't see anybody. That's because he's behind that slight roof, and then he pops up and then he starts firing, and then they fire back.
Just to amplify that a little bit and explain what we're talking about, because the next question is, Crooks was apparently spotted there. There were reports that he was acting strange near security. There were other accounts that people saw him with the rifle beforehand. There were others who said they saw him scaling the building, that they alerted law enforcement. In fact, it was being reported that Secret Service was alerted to watch him. And the Butler County Sheriff, Michael Sloop, told CBS News that police were looking for Crooks, and they confirmed that an officer scaled the roof. Quote, all I know is the officer had both hands on the roof to get up on the roof, never made it because the shooter had turned towards the officer, and rightfully and smartly, the officer let go. I would have done the same thing. Absolutely. I mean, people think the officers are supermen, like you hold on the roof with one hand while you're hanging on for dear life and you pull a gun out. It doesn't work that way. So, Bobby, what's your take on that new development that, people had apparently seen him, law enforcement had seen him. He allegedly points the gun at a member of law enforcement. Was this just rapidly happening too quickly? And, there might have been an alert that someone's there, but like you said, they couldn't figure out where he was. That's the part that I think people find very strange.
It is very strange. And that should all be taken into account in the operational planning of this thing. And I've been involved in a lot. I was the special events coordinator for the FBI in Los Angeles. We coordinated security for the FBI at the Oscars, the Golden Globes, the Rose Bowl, things like that, with LAPD, with Secret Service sometimes. And so what should have happened is, and hopefully they're on the same radio. We had this after 9/11, the interoperability of radios between fire and police and federal and stuff. And so normally, the minute somebody sees somebody inside, not even close to the perimeter with a gun, the call goes out, gun, 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 and then the protectee gets taken out. So if that call would have been made, if that officer would have been able to get somebody's on the roof with a gun, then you take before any shots are fired, before you even see the guy, take the protectee out, get him to a safe place, resolve what that is, and maybe you put him back up on stage, maybe you don't. But as soon as somebody saw somebody with a gun that wasn't accounted for, it wasn't state police, wasn't local, whatever, you didn't know who this person was with a gun, all the radios should have went off, get the protectee safe, and then address whatever that was. That wasn't done here. I don't know if it wasn't done because the timing, and like you said, it happened very quickly right after that. I don't know but we need to, see the radio transmission logs, which are all recorded. We need to match that up with the video, so much video, and you're gonna be able to get almost a second by second analysis of who knew what when and why the word didn't go out to get him off the stage the minute they saw somebody with a gun.
Bobby, I have one more question for you. We're actually going to dedicate, I think, a separate sidebar to this, and it's about how Crooks had the weapon, right? So this AR-style rifle, apparently, as I mentioned, was purchased by his father, and it was reportedly more than 20 firearms that were registered to his father. They were kept at the family's home. We're trying to understand how he got access to it, and also, I guess the side question is whether or not his father could be legally responsible for what happened. In a similar vein, as we've talked about with the Crumbly case, what are your initial impressions on this? And again, I think we're going to explore this on another sidebar, but what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of guns. The problem with me is not that people have the guns. It's that they don't know how to secure them or they're not willing to secure them. I know gun safes are expensive and things like that, but I have guns in my house. They're always secured. You have to keep your weapon secured. Now, the father apparently, I thought maybe had this weapon for a number of years, and the kid had access to it. There's a lot of hunting in that area. The kid belongs to a gun range. He might have been able to legally buy his own guns. I don't know. So maybe the father lent him guns to go to the range, and he's done that for a number of years. So the father had no idea. The kid goes to the range all the time, maybe that's part of his hobby. People do sometimes have that hobby. And so maybe there wasn't, and like we talked about earlier, maybe there wasn't any indication on the part of the father. In the Crumbly case, there are cases where the kid or the person, the child, the parent, they have some indication that the kid has problems and he shouldn't have access to a gun. But here we're talking about, there may not have been any indication that this 20-year-old man should not be able to borrow his father's weapon and go to the range.
As the FBI leads the investigation into the shooter and the lapses in security protocol that allowed this shooting to happen, and we've covered this a lot more thoroughly on previous sidebars, I want to focus on the parents of Matthew Thomas Crooks. So we have Mary Elizabeth Crooks and we have Matthew Brian Crooks of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, licensed professional counselors. A neighbor has described them as nice people, that this came out of nowhere, that no one expected this. Another neighbor came out and told Crooks' parents, "Please don't blame yourself. It was not your fault." Reporting indicates that these parents have been cooperating with law enforcement. In fact, Matthew Crooks apparently told CNN that he was trying to figure out, quote, what the hell is going on, and that he would, quote, wait until he talks to law enforcement before speaking publicly about his son. So it does become a question, though, of how much they knew about what was going on with their son, although we reported that it doesn't seem, based on his cell phone and computer data, there are any outward political ideologies or religious motivations or clues that he was going to do this. In other words, there were no outward points or clues that he was wanting or planning to commit this killing, which makes it just so more eerie. And it seems Crooks was a nursing home worker, no criminal history. His employer, Bethel Park Skilled Nursing and Rehab Center, said his background check was clean. They were shocked by what happened. Crooks was living with his parents in this suburban neighborhood in Bethel Park. It's about 50 miles away from the shooting. But here is where it gets interesting. Authorities have indicated that Crooks used an AR-15 style rifle to commit this shooting using 5.56 ammunition, and that this gun and ammo was purchased legally by Crooks' father, Matthew. And I've seen some reporting that the purchase was possibly 6 months ago. I've seen other reporting indicating it was further back, a few years back. But the gun was registered to his father. That's what the reporting indicates. In fact, it was one of 20 guns registered with the shooter's father. That's what's been reported as well. And apparently this was all kept in the home. Now, according to the Washington Post, this type of weapon is very popular. About 1 in 20 adults own this type of firearm in the United States. And it's our understanding in Pennsylvania, background checks are required for long guns that are purchased from a firearm dealer, but they're not required from a private seller. And you don't need a permit or registration in Pennsylvania. And also Pennsylvania allows young people to openly carry rifles in emergencies. And my understanding also is that in Pennsylvania, they don't require gun owners to store their weapons safely. And it's also being reported that Thomas Crooks and his father, they were members of a local shooting club called the Clairton Sportsman's Club. So with all of that in mind, Are the parents legally responsible? Can they be criminally charged in any way? And why do I say that? Because Jennifer and James Crumbley, remember them? We covered that case out in Michigan, the parents of the Oxford High School shooter. They were convicted of involuntary manslaughter for their purchase of the weapon that was used in that mass shooting and for their failure to properly store the weapon and keep it out of their son's hands. The jury said in that case it was foreseeable that that could happen. Now, there were some very egregious facts in that case. The idea that on the day of the shooting, they were called into the school because of alarming drawings from their son, but they didn't take him out of school. They didn't use a cable lock on the gun. They didn't tell the school about the gun, that the shooter had apparently told his family he had heard voices, that this shooter had asked his father, James, for help and to take him to the doctor, but James apparently told him to just suck it up. So you had some really, really bad facts to establish that it was foreseeable that their son would do this. But what about in this case? Are we talking about the same thing or is it different? Well, for that, I want to bring on a very special guest, Charlie Langton, attorney, legal analyst, anchor for Fox 2 Detroit, and also WWJ News radio. And I'm here with Charlie. So, Charlie, by the way, what's the call sign for WWJ News? I should know this. I went to University of Michigan.
Yeah, I know. That's great. It's 950, AM 950 on the dial. It's been around for over 100 years. But it was the Crumbley case is an amazing case. And you're a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. So I went to the Detroit College of Law, which unfortunately now affiliated years after I graduated with Michigan State. So there may be a little rivalry. Maybe
that's okay. We'll allow it. We'll allow it here. It's fine. It's all fine. No, and look, Charlie, I'm so glad to have you on. First of all, it's great to meet you. But to be clear, and I want to be very, very clear about this, there is no indication at this point that the parents are in any way responsible for what happened. I can't be more clear about that. But having said that, if the gun was purchased by the father, we do have to ask some questions. So I ask this question of potential legal liability for the parents. What are you thinking about?
I'll give you the short answer is no. And I looked at the very same thing because it struck me, the first thing that struck me was that the father in the Crumbley case bought the gun for Ethan Crumbley, the shooter. And then the father in this case bought the gun for his son, the Trump shooter. But there's a big difference here. Ethan Crumbley, the shooter at the Oxford High School, was 15 years old. This guy was 20 years old. And under Michigan law, and the only way that the prosecutor brought this case was because that the parents have a legal duty to take care of their minor son. And if they breach that duty in a reckless way, then a jury could find involuntary manslaughter. And there are a number of jury instructions on that, and a number of instructions to the jury in both the James and Jennifer Crumbley trial about the duty on a parent to protect the child. And as you said just a minute ago, if you don't store your guns the right way, and if you are reckless in giving a 15-year-old a gun, etc., and not taking the kid out of school when you knew or should have known that the child had some mental illness and could have posed a danger, you breached the duty as a parent. That's Crumbley. But that's not the case here. He was 20 years old, an adult who under, as I understand Pennsylvania law, I don't practice there, but it's similar to Michigan, is that there's no duty on the part of the parent to take care of an otherwise healthy 20-year-old.
The reason I ask you if it's different is because he was living with them. And so let's just think about that for 1 second. I'm going to read you what the involuntary manslaughter is for Pennsylvania. And it says a person is guilty of involuntary manslaughter when as a direct result of the doing of an unlawful act in a reckless or grossly negligent manner, or the doing of a lawful act in a reckless or grossly negligent manner, he causes the death of another person. In my understanding, it's a very serious crime in Pennsylvania because it can carry up to 5 years in prison, although it is labeled as a misdemeanor, which I thought was interesting. But anyway, so when you look at that language, you don't believe, even though he was living with them, right, the parents have any kind of responsibility for storing the gun or for what happens with that gun, right?
No, because there's a superseding cause here is that the 20-year-old is an adult. The 20-year-old took the gun and shot at Trump and killed other people. So again, you still need a causation element. That may be the definition. And let's assume for the moment that the father was grossly negligent, although I don't know how having 20 legal guns purchased legally, presumably stored legally, although I don't know that. But assuming all that was, I don't even know how you're going to get over the first prong of recklessness, or certainly gross negligence. But even if you do get, somehow a jury would say that's all grossly negligent, the cause of the deaths and the injuries would be this adult. And there's no legal duty imposed, unlike Crumley. See, Crumley, you got to go the extra way. When you've got a minor, the parents have a duty. And if you breach that duty, then yes, you cause the injury. It is foreseeable, as you just said, that a minor might get a hold of an illegally stored gun, especially a minor with some mental illness, and then go out and kill someone.
Yeah.
This is not the case here. And I don't read that into the jury instruction that you've got in Pennsylvania. So I don't even think they can bring a charge in this case.
Let me ask you an interesting legal question when it comes to the idea of responsibility and duty and foreseeability. You know, in the Crumley case, you was very clear, at least to me and clear to the jury, that it was foreseeable that not only he could gain access to the gun, but he would commit a school shooting in that neighborhood. Isn't there something for the legal analysis to say this happened 50 miles away? So when you talk about the location of the crime, does that ever come into a factor that this wasn't somebody who took out a weapon and used it at a school, but the allegation is that he took the weapon and then traveled 50 miles to a political rally and opened fire on the former president of the United States? Would you say that matters in the foreseeability analysis?
Yeah, but it helps the parents of the guy. Be my defense.
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely.
How's the parents going to know he goes? It'd be better if he shot in the neighborhood, perhaps. But yeah, the fact that he went 50 miles, how can you possibly foresee that he's going to travel 50 miles to find a Trump rally?
I guess my question is, does it matter in general? If somebody, let's say, for example, he was 15 years old. Let's say he was 13 years old. I don't know. Let's 15 years old. And he takes the weapon and he uses it to commit a crime in another state, or he uses it to commit a crime 50 miles away in a further part of the state. Does that matter in the analysis, or will a court or a prosecutor say, hey, listen, it was foreseeable he could have used this gun for violence? That's the end of the discussion.
No, I think that's a good point. And I would argue, if I was representing the minor shooter, that yes, it would not be foreseeable that he would take the gun. It's a very good point. Yes, in the Crumley case, we had the additional argument that there was a piece of paper that was shown to the Crumley parents. It was an hour before the shooting, where he drew pictures of, I'm going to kill people, blood everywhere. And the parents said, send him back to school. Well, that did not happen, as I understand the facts, in this case, in the Trump shooting. So I think there are a very significant difference. But your principle is right. You still have to have a foreseeable. But let's change the fact. Let's change the facts even a little bit more. I know that Pennsylvania, as I read anyway, does not have a red flag law. Right. So we have red flag laws, which are basically extreme risk protection orders, meaning that if, and I want to emphasize if, because I don't know the facts well enough of this Mr. Crooks case, the 20-year-old shooter. But if he had mental illness, and he lived with his parents, and then parents had 20 guns, ammunition, maybe even explosives in the house, and the father and mother presumably knew that the shooter had mental illness, does that pose a duty on the parents to red flag, call the police and say, you know what? We have an arsenal here, and I have a son who is not mentally uptight, or who is mentally ill, remove the guns. So that does, after the Oxford shooting, our legislature did pass a red flag law.
Sure.
Didn't apply in the Crumley case, but it could apply now in Pennsylvania. I will bet you that the legislature in Pennsylvania will look to tighten up at least the red flag laws. And again, I don't know if this person had mental illness, but
let's do the extremes here. Putting the red flag law aside, one of the things that strikes me in this case is reporting that authorities had found explosive materials in the shooter's car, that he had a detonator on him. If there were bomb-making materials that were found in the home and he was living with his parents, and you do let's do a hypothetical here. This is still early, but again, there's no evidence to suggest this, but if they did have knowledge that he was building explosives, if they did have knowledge that he could gain access to the gun, if they even knew what he was planning to do but didn't do anything, could then this be a different kind of case?
Yes, I think it could be a different case. And the facts that we're changing, because we're speculating now, if the dad or mother knew that this guy was building up bombs or acquiring weapons and acquiring ammunition, and maybe, I need a little more facts here, but maybe he suggested he didn't like Trump, he didn't like politicians or something like that, I could see a better case being made for the prosecution or the government in this case. Better. Because then there is a link. There's that connection between the illegal activity. I'm assuming making bombs is illegal in Pennsylvania. And if the father knew that his son, I don't care what age at this point in time, were making bombs, and maybe the father bought some bombs, maybe some of these guns or ammunition are used in the bomb making process. I don't know. But even if it was, now there's a better connection between the parents and the alleged illegal activity, and then the connection with ultimately the shooting in the Trump situation. That's a better case. I'm not saying a great case.
Sure.
But certainly a better case.
And again, we're not saying that's the facts of this. We're just speculating here about what might. Again, we're playing different scenarios here. And by the way, I will also say, it's come out a lot that Mr. Crooks was a loner, that he was made fun of in high school. He didn't make the rifle team because he wasn't a good shot. He was shy. On itself, all kids have issues. And you can't hold a parent responsible because their child is going through a hardship. You can't say, oh, well, he was bullied, then you should have known he was going to do that, right? The Crumbly case was more of an extreme example, but I think it's important to make that distinction as well. Despite what he might have been going through and even having a tough time, and if he's bullied, if he does commit an act of violence or a child commits or she commits an act of violence, that doesn't necessarily mean the parents are responsible. True.
Interesting that you mentioned that, though, Jesse. I actually found a lot of similarities in the person and the personality between the Oxford shooter and the Trump shooter. They were both quiet. They were both above average in intellect. They were both loners. They didn't have many friends. They both lived with parents. They both grew up in a fairly well-to-do middle America city. So there are similarities in the makeup here. Doesn't mean they're criminals, right, but it does. Well, actually, it could be criminals, but it doesn't mean that there's going to be a connection to the parents. But I do see a lot of similarities, and even the dads bought the guns in both cases as well. So
and look,
I think it's worth looking at.
I will also say in a lot of mass shootings, that profile seems to be somewhat consistent. I'm not generalizing across the board, but we do see that. Let me ask you, outside of the criminal context, from a civil context, do the parents have to be concerned about anything at this point?
Well, civil's a different standard, as you know. I highly doubt that any insurance company, if they're going to try to get homeowners coverage, is going to cover the act of their murderous criminal son. So as a practical matter, I would say there's not going to be any kind of insurance coverage here. So if the families want to sue the shooter's parents, I guess there may be some academic exercise here. Generally speaking, and I did a lot of civil work for many years before I did anything in television or radio, is that we do look for insurance, unfortunately. And if the people, and I don't know how well-to-do these parents are, I haven't looked at them. I would say they're modest means here, so probably not. Although technically, if we can prove that the parents were negligent, just negligent, and what is negligence in this case? Could it be that there were many, many shooters? Could there be warning signs? Again, we don't know. I understand that the authorities, FBI, looking at the shooter's phone records, maybe there's a connection between dad and the shooter. I don't know that, assuming there would be. Dad may have known, maybe. That might be negligence. Again, we still have to go through the causation elements. One of them, as you mentioned, shooting took place 50 miles from the house. It's still not probably foreseeable. So bottom line here, even on a civil case, I don't think legally it's good, and practically it's even worse.
This idea of a second shooter, because the shooter identified by authorities as 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, authorities say he acted alone. The question is, did he? Did he have help? Was there a second shooter, to be even more specific? And I'm going to explain why that theory has circulated a bit online. Now, to be clear, this is a rapidly evolving story, so we are trying to catch up as quickly as we can as this investigation unfolds, and of course, this investigation is being led by the FBI currently. So this past Saturday, authorities say Crooks opened fire during a pro-Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, ended up wounding the former president, as well as critically injuring two other individuals, 57-year-old David Dutch and 74-year-old James Copenhaver. But as we know, this also resulted in the death of 50-year-old Corey Compertor, a firefighter, a married father of two who was apparently trying to protect his family from the gunfire when he was killed. Crooks was reportedly positioned on a roof of a nearby building outside of the event security's perimeter, about 130 to 150 yards away from Donald Trump's podium, began firing an AR-15 style rifle only minutes into the former president's speech. He was instantly neutralized by a Secret Service counter sniper team, although, as we will talk about in a minute, it apparently was not the team that has been photographed, that was in photographs and circulated online, but a different team. We'll talk about that. And authorities reportedly discovered a remote detonator on Crooks's body, as well as remote-controlled explosives, bulletproof vest, fully loaded magazines in his car, which was parked nearby. Investigators also found another vest, explosive materials, and a 3D printer at his home in Bethel Park, 50 miles away, where he apparently lived with his parents. And according to CNN, a joint FBI and Department of Homeland Security bulletin reveals that Crooks had been receiving multiple packages in the months leading up to the shooting, including those marked as possibly containing hazardous materials. And as we previously reported on Sidebar, authorities haven't been able to identify a precise motive for this attack, even though the FBI is combing through the shooter's online history, cell phones, computer searches, and so forth, although there's also reporting that Crooks had searched online for the date not only of the Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, but also the date of the Democratic National Convention. And according to CNN, Crooks had pictures of both President Biden and Trump on his phone. So it makes you wonder what exactly, again, was his apparent motive, or what were his targets? It's not entirely clear. Now, CNN is also reporting that Crooks had visited a shooting range the day before the rally. Apparently, he and his father were members of the Clairton Sportsman's Club. Then he goes to a Home Depot where he purchases a ladder, then goes to a local gun store in Bethel Park to buy 50 rounds of ammunition. So this is what the allegations are right now. This is what the reporting is right now. So investigators believe in all of this that Crooks acted alone. However, how do we know he acted alone? And let's also talk about this idea of the second shooter, because we're going to try to do our best here to dispel fact from fiction. And for that, let me bring in once again Chad Ayers, former sheriff's deputy, SWAT member, founder of Proactive Response Group. Thank you so much for coming on, Chad. We were first on a few days ago when this first happened, the first day, the Monday after this. Now I have you back. We knew more information. And I think it's important to dispel any kind of misinformation out there, or in the alternative, to suggest there might be something here. So I ask you, based on everything we know currently at this time, at the time of this recording, do you believe Crooks acted alone?
Well, Jesse, first of all, thanks for having me back. I do. Absolutely. Crooks acted alone. And I know we're going to dive into this. Obviously, I think it's important that our viewers, your viewers, understand the power of the internet, the power of social media. You know, that's why I've been saying, I said on Monday, we really need to wait until this investigation is fully completed to start gauging some of this stuff. But unfortunately, because of the times that we live in social media, people are going to start making up stuff. There's conspiracy theorists out here. I get it. Look, if I, as an outsider looking in without the background I have, I would have some questions about some of the stuff that's being reported. And it's very easy to go down that road. But I just encourage the American people to take a step back, let this investigation fall out, and wait until we start getting facts. That's the key word there.
Well, let me explain why people believe this. It's interesting because it's not coming totally out of left field, and I'll explain. Because, by the way, before we even get into that, when the FBI says that they believe Crooks acted alone, and more specifically, when the Pittsburgh special agent in charge, Kevin Rojek, says Crooks acted alone and that there are currently no public safety concerns, I know that can always change in an investigation, right? But to make a statement like that means something, right? To say, because if they weren't sure he acted alone, they wouldn't make a statement like that, right?
If the Bureau is going to step out and make a statement like that, you damn well better be sure that you've got your facts straight. It is, especially on something as serious as an attempted assassination on,
Right.
a presidential candidate and a former president. You damn well better be sure you have your facts straight. So, correct. I think that with the special agent in charge coming out and saying that, we can rest assured that they feel confident this is a single shooter.
Okay. So now with this in mind, let me tell you why there has been talk about a second shooter. According to CNN, Catalin Gregoris, the director of the National Center for Media Forensics at the University of Colorado in Denver, and Cole Whitecotton, senior professional research associate at that same institution, they analyzed audio of the shooting. And apparently they concluded that the first 3 shots were consistent with alleged weapon A, the next 5 shots were consistent with alleged weapon B, and the final, quote, acoustic impulse was emitted by a possible weapon C. And the audio also confirms that the shooter was on a rooftop that they say 393 to 492 feet away. Now, some have said, is that weapon C from another shooter? Or was it another Secret Service sniper? And I'm curious your thoughts because, according to the Washington Post, 2 audio experts, Rob Mayer of Montana State University and Stephen Beck of Beck Audio Forensics, they counted a total of 10 gunshots. So the first 8 shots had similar acoustic characteristics. They were fired within 6 seconds. Then there's a 9th shot from an apparent different area. 16 seconds later, there's a 10th shot. And the last 2, they say, had different audio characteristics from the first 8. But they also say that this audio in and of itself can't tell you exactly where the shots came from. And Chad, I know I'm giving you a lot of buildup here, but I just want to couple this with one more thing. That as Fox News has reported, there is that photo of the pair of the U.S. Secret Service counter snipers that we all believed were the ones who neutralized the gunman. But apparently there were 4 counter sniper teams that day, and there was another team that neutralized the shooter. And apparently a member of local law enforcement had also engaged the shooter, so seeming to mean that this local marksman fired a shot. And the Butler County DA says that this person has been placed on routine leave, which is standard for all police-involved shootings. But I gave you that build-up to say we have these audio characteristics. Now we're learning a little bit more about the sequence of shots. Again, after laying that out, do you believe that leads to the idea that there was a second shooter, or this is more people responding to the shooter itself?
Yeah, I can understand where people are coming from on this, but obviously the audio acoustics, it can do strange things. We've all been in baseball stadiums when fireworks go off, or obviously I've been involved in deadly force encounters and shootings multiple times in my career. The echo, the ricochet. Now, keep in mind a lot of what we are hearing as outsiders. There's microphones involved all over that stage, so we're hearing different delays and things like that. As I have watched this video, I mean, Jesse, it seems like 1,000 times by now. Yes, I feel like it's consistent with the initial fire from the shooter, taking his rounds, followed by the counter sniper team's rifles. And then likely that last one they are hearing is the locals counter sniper taking that shot that the DA's reported that gentleman's been placed on leave. Also, the sound aspect, right? You might have a mixture of these counter sniper guys who have suppressors on their rifles, which I would assume many of them do. Your local counter sniper may not have had a suppressor on his rifle. So you're going to get different audios through that feed. But again, at the end of the day, I am confident we are still working with one shooter and multiple law enforcement shooters.
And let's amplify this a little bit. If he had been collaborating with somebody else, you would imagine there would be some sort of communications. And again, I wonder how much is being shared with the public. But I will tell you, right at the time of this recording, based on reporting, there's no manifesto, there's no note, there's no writings, there's no social media posts that outline a motive. But other than that, that would suggest why Crooks did this. And I would imagine there would be more communications with other people. And I will tell you that they say that the shooter had a second phone. So he had 2 phones, one apparently on his body, and then a second phone at the house that had 27 contacts in it. So I imagine the FBI is going to be seeing who those people are. But at this point, if he had been planning this with somebody else, A, would we have known about those communications? Shouldn't they be there? And B, would the FBI tell us at this point?
No, I don't think at this point, if there is, some type of communication where he was working, not saying that there's a second shooter, but someone maybe influencing him. I think part of the investigation would be not to reveal that at this time until they have had the chance to fully vet all these contacts on the phone, going through social media messages, text messages, emails. Look, the Bureau does this on a daily basis on counterterrorism things and counterterrorism cases.
But the 27 contacts in his phone, do you find it strange that this guy had apparently 2 separate phones?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say strange. Someone that has gotten to the point where they've decided that they're going to assassinate the former president. They're probably going to try anything and everything to cover their steps. Maybe what he's doing is he knows how this ends, and he doesn't want his family involved. Who knows who's paying his phone bill. But again, probably buying a drop phone, a prepaid phone. He's done his research. It's obvious he's done his research because with the explosives involved and things like this, like I said earlier, this guy didn't just wake up yesterday and decide that he's going to commit this attack. He's planned this out.
Well, okay, let me amplify this a little bit more because, again, trying to understand if he acted alone. I don't know if this is a ridiculous point to make, but I am curious about it. I am sure people are wondering, how could he make that shot? Because do you have to be a really good shot? And to be clear, let's be clear, right? There's been reporting online that former President Donald Trump was within centimeters of being killed. And, there was reporting that an apparent classmate of Crooks told media that Crooks never made the school's rifle team because how bad of a shot he was. Now, obviously, he could have improved, but how tough is that shot to make from that distance? Because again, someone could say he might have had help. So walk us through from that distance, again, about 130, 150 yards away, to make that shot from an elevated surface at Donald Trump. What do you make of that?
He's proned out. He's laying out. He's stabilized that rifle. I could take my 5-year-old nephew, and in about 20 minutes, I could lay him behind that rifle, steady it, tell him to put it on this target, pull the trigger, and it's going to go there. It is not a tough shot whatsoever, especially with a 5.56 caliber assault rifle. Very easy. I know we mentioned it Monday. I am looking forward to knowing what type of scope he had. Was it a magnified, type of scope? Was it a red dot? What was that? Not that it changes a lot, but it does change a little bit. But at the end of the day, whether it's a good shot or not, the only reason former President Trump is alive today is because he turned his head, period.
Let's lay out how on earth this happened. I mean, authorities say that Crooks was able to scale a building that was on the outside security perimeter of this pro-Trump rally. It's the American Glass Research Building. Sets up an AR-15 style rifle about 150 yards away from Trump's podium where he was giving a speech, and opens fire within minutes of Trump's speech at about 6:10, 6:11 p.m.
And that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
He's on top of the roof. Don't go over there. He's on the roof, buddy.
He's dead. I just seen his hair go up a on the head. He's dead. Holy
USA! Now, this shooter was instantly neutralized by a Secret Service counter sniper team. And I got a hands off to the Secret Service, who immediately, as soon as the shots rang out, swarmed onto Donald Trump to protect him, shield him from any continuing gunfire. You want to talk about heroes? You want to talk about selfless actions? That's a prime example. Now, authorities, they reportedly discovered a remote detonator or transmitter on Crooks' body, as well as remote-controlled explosives, a bulletproof vest, fully loaded magazines, and a drone in his car, which was parked nearby. And investigators also found another vest, explosive materials, and a 3D printer at his home in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. So that's about 50 miles away. He had apparently been living there with his parents. And according to CNN, a joint FBI and Department of Homeland Security bulletin has revealed that Crooks had been receiving multiple packages in the months leading up to the shooting, including those marked as possibly containing hazardous materials. So first, let's start off with a major strange aspect. Big question. How was this suspected shooter even able to get into position when reporting indicates that both spectators and law enforcement at the event were aware of him? Let me expand upon that. There were reports that people saw this shooter beforehand. There's even video that is circulated online of him seemingly checking out the roof, scoping out the area. There are those who say they saw him with a duffel bag and rangefinder. Then there are reportedly people who saw him climbing the roof. For example, Ben Macer told KDKA that he saw the guy move from roof to roof and told an officer that this shooter was on the roof. When I turned around to go back to where I was, it was when the gunshot started, and then it was just chaos, and we all came running away, and that was that. Now, apparently, investigators believe that Crooks had also used a bike to check out the Butler site, and according to the New York Post, a witness saw that bike around 40 minutes before the shooting. It's being reported that senators held a briefing with top Secret Service officials, including the director of the Secret Service, Kim Cheadle, who we'll talk a lot about, and one senator, John Barrasso of Wyoming, reported that more than an hour before the shooting occurred, the Secret Service had identified Crooks as a character of suspicion because they saw him with that rangefinder in that bag. And then, according to Fox News, sources say 10 minutes before Trump walked on that stage, the Secret Service supposedly changed their assessment. Instead of considering Crooks suspicious, they'd apparently upgraded his status to a threat. And yet, despite all of that, the ex-president was still allowed to step onto that stage. Why? That's a big question, right? According to another Fox report, the Secret Service agent in charge was actually on the phone with local and state police about this threat, about this guy, while the shooting was taking place. There were also reports that a sniper from a local tactical team had snapped a photograph of the gunman, saw him looking through a rangefinder, again, this is before the shooting, and then radioed that information in to a command post. ABC News reported that the shooter was spotted by Secret Service counter-sniper teams 20 minutes before the gunshots rang out. And then there's reporting that a Butler Township police officer actually confronted the shooter, apparently was hoisted up to that roof. Crooks apparently spots him, points the weapon at the officer, who then lets go of his grip and drops 8 feet to the ground. Now, Butler County Sheriff Michael Sloop defended this officer's action, saying he probably saved Donald Trump's life by delaying what could have been a fatal shot. Quote, can you imagine 10 seconds before that the president was looking straight ahead and where that bullet could have potentially landed? So in total, the reporting indicates that Crooks first came on law enforcement's radar about, and this is approximation, but it seems to be about 3 hours before the shooting. He was apparently walking by the magnetometers, carrying a rangefinder at one point. The bottom line, how come authorities didn't stop Crooks? And more importantly, didn't stop Donald Trump from getting on that stage? And what complicates this, of course, is that the Secret Service director, Kimberly Cheadle, who I mentioned, seemed to at first say it was the responsibility of local law enforcement to sweep and secure the building that the shooter was perched on top of, although she has since backtracked from those comments. There's also reporting that police were inside the building, but not on the roof. And she also told ABC News that there may have been a danger to post a sniper team on the roof where the gunman was located. Quote, that building in particular has a sloped roof at its highest point, and so, there's a safety factor that would be considered there that we wouldn't want to put somebody up on a sloped roof. But that decision and these comments are facing a lot of scrutiny. In fact, one law enforcement official said that the sloped roof could have created a visual block to the counter-snipers and that a tree may have prevented one of the sniper teams from seeing the gunman as he climbed onto the roof. Now, I had the chance to speak with former Secret Service agent Charles Marino about this. And by the way, he also acted at one point in time as senior law enforcement advisor to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Let's hear what he had to say.
The Secret Service has this statutory responsibility to protect the former president. They also have the responsibility of not only creating, but also effectively implementing the overall security plan for the venue. Let me state, this includes the inner perimeter, the middle perimeter, and the outer perimeter, because they also have the responsibility of requesting state and local law enforcement assets, as they do throughout the entire country, to help implement that security plan. So the Secret Service owns this. They got to take the hit on this. It was their job to make sure that this building was taken out of play.
Talk to me how to make sense of the idea that he was in their sights for an hour before. They saw him as a person of interest or a suspicious character, and yet Donald Trump was allowed to take that stage.
Well, as we know, whenever you have a catastrophic failure like the Secret Service had on Saturday, it's going to expose other failures in the system. And the one area that we're going to find additional failures in is going to be communication. So let's go through the timeline that you just set up very well. If we're talking about an hour out and thinking that there was a threat that's walking around with a rangefinder that's being armed, that person's got to be located either by state and local law enforcement and then interviewed by the protective intelligence teams that are on the site. If that person can't be found, that information needs to be communicated to the protective detail, because you may not want to bring the former president that far out in advance to the site at all. You may want to take him somewhere else, like a local police department, for him to hang out, or maybe he stays on his aircraft. There's a number of options. Now, if we're talking about the 10-minute out scenario, where you're saying the Secret Service is now confirmed that this is not suspicious person, but an actual threat, then the natural question is, why does the detail bring him to stage? Why do they allow him to go up to the podium? And that's where there's going to be a lot of questions regarding the communication flow. Was it sent at all? Was the information sent at all to the Secret Service detail? Was it sent but not broadly enough and transmitted to them? Or was it ignored? And was there a decision to say, you know, we're going to take them to the stage anyway?
Now, that being said, Cheadle said that no assets from the rally were diverted on the day that Trump was shot, even though apparently there were other events in the state that required Secret Service protection. And she also said that there was no truth to the rumor. And she also said that there was no truth to the rumors that the former president's detail had asked for more resources and was denied. And as for accusations that the Secret Service role in this event was somehow partisan, Cheadle pushed back on that, saying the Secret Service is not political. People's safety is not political. And she also added that the Secret Service is tasked with the tremendous responsibility of protecting the current and former leaders of our democracy, and it is a responsibility that I take incredibly seriously, and I am committed to fulfilling that mission. By the way, there have been calls for her to resign, and she has indicated she will not resign from her role. We're going to talk about that a lot more and some more of the potential fallout for the Secret Service. We'll get to that in a little bit. Before we even get into the next area, the apparent motive in this case, or what could be the motive, there is one more detail I have to get into. Why didn't the sniper team immediately take the shooter out? I mentioned all the different aspects about how they might have seen him beforehand. Was there an opportunity to take him out? So I want to play you some of my conversation this past week with former sheriff's deputy and SWAT member Chad Ayers, and also former FBI agent Bobby Chacon.
Stuff circling around the internet that they asked for permission to take the shot. That is absolutely false. They, in this type of situation, they do not have to ask for any type of authority to take a shot or utilize deadly force in this type of situation. When you are assigned and you've got a former president on there and someone is laying on the roof with a long gun, the first opportunity they have, they're going to take that. So again, I don't want to Monday morning quarterback or second this counter sniper unit. There's the possibility that maybe the angle and the slant of the roof, they couldn't get a visual on him until he got to a certain position.
Now, I think that when you look at the video of the counter sniper who took the shot, they're looking in the direction of that building. And I'm pretty sure that's because they're hearing radio traffic saying somebody's on the roof, because there was some chaotic situation over there. You saw the video of people saying, a woman saying, he's on the roof, he's got a gun. I'm sure that was put over comms. When you look at that roof, it's sloped away, and I don't think the counter sniper guys could actually see the shooter yet. He was crawling up. He was on his belly, and then what happened was an officer confronted him and then retreated. He turned around with his rifle towards the officer. What that did was make the guy move quicker. Then he popped up really fast over that peak and started shooting. That's when the guy on the sniper first, because you see them looking there, and they're probably saying, I see the roof, I don't see anybody. I see the roof, I don't see anybody. That's because he's behind that slight roof, and then he pops up, and then he starts firing, and then they fire back.
Couple things to note about that. So it seems that the counter sniper team that we had seen pictures of that were circulated in the media, this was the team that we had thought had neutralized the suspected shooter. It turns out they weren't the ones who took the actual shot that killed the gunman. This was apparently a different counter sniper team. But again, Bobby could be 100% right that there was a visual obstruction in their way, and that's why they didn't act quicker. And by the way, we are not putting blame on them whatsoever. They were able to neutralize this target immediately. There is one more thing I have to mention as well. According to Brian Enton from News Nation, and this is on Twitter, or X, quote, sources within the Secret Service say the working theory right now is the Secret Service sniper did not initially shoot Crooks because the sniper thought Crooks was a police officer on the roof. Okay, so another possible explanation for what happened here. Now, I want to talk about one of the strangest aspects of all of this, motive, right? Why would Crooks supposedly do this? And that is where we get into this whole other territory, because it's so weird. It's so weird. The FBI is poring over his cell phone history, his online search history, digital footprint, and there appears to be, at the time of this recording, no clear motive, no apparent political or religious ideology or motivation. And as far as we know from reporting, there's no manifesto, there's no note, there's no writings, there's no social media posts that outline a motive or plan here. And that includes interviews, by the way, because apparently the FBI conducted over 200 interviews with family, neighbors, co-workers. They can't find anything. Now, there is reporting that Crooks did conduct searches online about major depression disorder. According to ABC News, Crooks had been registered as a Republican voter, but a $15 donation to this progressive group was also labeled and recorded under Thomas Crooks. This was back in January of 2021. Reporting also indicates he was a loner. He enjoyed gaming and computers. He had been maybe severely bullied in the past. Interestingly, one of his apparent instructors at a community college where he graduated in May said his homework responses were thoughtful. His email responses were polite. This is according to Reuters. So it seems the main theme is no one saw this coming. It was all unexpected. At least that's what's coming out right now. Now, I should tell you, at one point, there was reporting that Crooks had allegedly posted a message on the gaming platform Steam before the shooting where he supposedly wrote, "July 13th will be my premiere. Watch as it unfolds." But now it appears, according to the FBI, that that was fake. So we're still working on confirming whether or not that was a legitimate post from Thomas Matthew Crooks. However, there is also reporting that Crooks had searched online not only about the Trump rally in Butler, but also about the Democratic National Convention. And then on the day of the shooting, he searched Butler farm photos and a nearby gun shop in Bethel Park. There's also reporting he was searching for images of Trump, President Biden, other famous figures. So what were his targets? What would he have done if he survived that day? Something to think about. And investigators say that Crooks had visited that Butler site at least 2 times, including on the day of the shooting earlier in the day, and then left and came back. So possibly showing this preparation. In fact, ABC News also reported that someone using the suspect's name, so presumably the suspect himself, had signed up for that Butler rally a week before the shooting. Preparation, premeditation. And actually, with that in mind, CNN is also reporting that Crooks had visited the shooting range the day before the rally. They also say he went to Home Depot where he purchased a ladder, then a local gun store in Bethel Park to buy 50 rounds of ammunition. In fact, when they turned over his body after he was killed, they found a receipt for Home Depot. Now, here is again former FBI agent Bobby Chacon talking about this idea of a motive and how strange it is we can't find one yet.
You know, there's an implied motivation. He wanted Donald Trump dead because he didn't want Donald Trump to become the next president. I think that's kind of an implied thing. I mean, he might have hated Donald Trump for other reasons, but it's hard to see that he took this action for any other reason other than he wanted to stop Donald Trump from becoming the next president. I mean, he might have had a grievance with Trump for other past actions that Trump may have taken while he was president the first time. But this is a political assassination, and normally those things have that implied motive of you want to stop this person's political ambitions. You do normally find a lot of political ideology in the person's lifestyle and his background and his conversations with people and his associations with people and organizations. And so normally they are ideologues and they are hell-bent on carrying out an act of violence, a political act of violence. It's normally very apparent from looking at their background. And here they're not finding that. So, there's that, and like I said, there's an implied motivation, but it could be, he was just out for fame. But oftentimes we also see indications of that in his background. He wanted to become famous because, because killing Trump obviously would make him famous. Or, because we had different motivations when Hinckley shot Reagan. It was because of his fascination with Jodie Foster. It thought he would maybe be famous. The person that killed John Lennon actually was a big John Lennon fan. So sometimes these people have these ideas in their head that this act, I'm going to carry out this act, and then I would be viewed as this other person or in this way. So, that's more of a mental health expert question. Like, could it, and what is in his background might indicate that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, a political motivated attack normally has some kind of, he would be more active politically, either online or in person, and we're just not finding that right now.
Apparently drives to the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, parks the car, uses the ladder to get to the roof of the adjacent American Glass Research Building, sets up and opens fire. So, Bobby, when we talk about what his motivation was, and we see law enforcement trying to set up a timeline here, what do you take away from that?
Well, the young man was very determined. Clearly, he's determined to carry out this attack with all of these steps he's taking. What we call pre-event planning and pre-event activity, which begs the question on why we're not seeing more rhetoric, more associations in his background that would have led somebody to believe that he was going to do this. If he was able to keep all of this rage and carrying a gun to a rooftop and shooting into a crowd, and practicing the day before. I mean, you are determined. There's a lot of rage there. And to have that rage not manifest itself in prior behavior or prior acts or prior discussions is really unusual.
Now, although we reported that it doesn't seem, based on his cell phone data, his computer data, these searches, his online activity, that there are any outward political ideologies or religious motivations. But what also makes this weird about no apparent motive, no red flags, nobody seeing anything in his behavior, nothing from his online activity. Crooks was apparently also a nursing home worker. He had no criminal history. His employer, Bethel Park Skilled Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, said his background check was clean. They were shocked. Crooks was, as I mentioned, living with his parents in this suburban neighborhood in Bethel Park, about 50 miles away from the shooting. And I'll tell you what, let's talk about the shooter's parents for a minute, because there's a lot of questions there too. So we're talking about Mary Elizabeth Crooks, Matthew Brian Crooks, again of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. They are licensed professional counselors. A neighbor described them as nice people. Another neighbor came out and told the Crooks, please don't blame yourself, it was not your fault. Reporting indicates that these parents have been cooperating with law enforcement. In fact, Matthew Crooks apparently told CNN that he was trying to figure out what the hell is going on and that he would wait until he talks to law enforcement before speaking publicly about his son. But it does become a question of how much they knew about what was going on with him. And it becomes interesting because it was reported this week that the Crooks, the shooter's parents, called local police hours before the shooting. They said they were concerned that he was missing. We don't know more about what was said exactly and whether or not it had anything to do with the shooting or that he had access to the weapon. And we also don't know what steps police took afterwards from that call. But this is where it's important, because it wasn't just that Crooks had been living with his family. Authorities have indicated that Crooks used this AR-15 style rifle to commit the shooting using 5.56 ammunition, and that this gun was purchased legally by Crooks' father, Matthew. Now, I've seen some reporting that the purchase was possibly 6 months ago. I've seen other reporting indicating it was further back, years ago. But the gun was apparently registered to the father. And in fact, it reportedly was one of 20 guns that were registered with Mr. Crooks, the father here, all kept in the home. And my understanding, No permit or registration is required under Pennsylvania law. That's my understanding. And my understanding also is that Pennsylvania doesn't require gun owners to store their weapons safely. So it's also being reported that Thomas Crooks, the perceived shooter here, and his father were members of a local shooting club called the Clairton Sportsman's Club. But here's the question in all of this. Are the parents legally responsible, especially when you consider what was found at the home? Remember I mentioned all those materials that were found in the home, the packages. Why do I ask that? You remember Jennifer and James Crumbly out in Michigan, the parents of the Oxford High School shooter? They were convicted of involuntary manslaughter. They purchased the weapon in that case that was used in the mass shooting. And they were also convicted for their failure to properly store the weapon, keep it out of their son's hands. The jury said in that case it was foreseeable that that could happen. Now, of course, there were some egregious facts in that case, right? The idea that on the day of the shooting, they were called into the school because of alarming drawings of their son, but they didn't take him out of school. They didn't use a cable lock on the gun. They didn't tell the school about the gun, that the shooter told his family he heard voices, that the shooter had asked his father, James, for help to take him to the doctor, but James apparently told him to just suck it up. So we have some really bad facts in that case to establish that it was foreseeable. But what about this case? Are we talking the same thing? Is it different? Well, talking Michigan, I spoke to Charlie Langton this week, and this is a Michigan attorney, legal analyst, anchor for Fox 2 Detroit, WWJ News Radio, and I asked him about whether the parents could face criminal charges in any way.
I'll give you the short answer is no. And I looked at the very same thing because it struck me, the first thing that struck me was that the father in the Crumley case bought the gun for Ethan Crumley, the shooter. And then the father in this case bought the gun for his son, the Trump shooter. But there's a big difference here. Ethan Crumley, the shooter at the Oxford High School, was 15 years old. But that's not the case here. He was 20 years old, an adult who under, as I understand Pennsylvania law, I don't practice there, but it's similar to Michigan, is that there's no duty on the part of the parent to take care of an otherwise healthy 20-year-old.
You don't believe, even though he was living with them, right, that the parents have any kind of responsibility for storing the gun or for what happens with that gun, right?
No, because there's a superseding cause here is that the 20-year-old, is an adult. The 20-year-old took the gun and shot at Trump and killed other people. And let's assume for the moment that the father was grossly negligent, although I don't know how having 20 legal guns purchased legally, presumably stored legally, although I don't know that, but assuming all that was, I don't even know how you're going to get over the first prong of recklessness or certainly gross negligence. And there's no legal duty imposed, unlike Crumley. See, Crumley, you've got to go the extra way. When you've got a minor, the parents have a duty. And if you breach that duty, then yes, you cause the injury. It is foreseeable, as you just said, that a minor might get a hold of an illegally stored gun, especially a minor with some mental illness, and then go out and kill someone.
Yeah.
This is not the case here. And I don't read that into the jury instruction that you've got in Pennsylvania.
You know, in the Crumley case, you was very clear, at least to me and clear to the jury, that it was foreseeable that not only he could gain access to the gun, but he would commit a school shooting in that neighborhood. Isn't there something for the legal analysis to say this happened 50 miles away? So when you talk about the location of the crime, does that ever come into a factor that this wasn't somebody who took out a weapon and used it at a school, but the allegation is that he took the weapon and then traveled 50 miles to a political rally and opened fire on the former president of the United States? Would you say that matters in the foreseeability analysis?
Yeah, but it helps the parents of the guy. Be my defense.
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. If they did have knowledge that he was building explosives, if they did have knowledge that he could gain access to the gun, if they even knew what he was planning to do but didn't do anything, could then this be a different kind of case?
Yes, I think it could be a different case. And the facts that we're changing, because we're speculating now, if the dad or mother knew that this guy was building up bombs or acquiring weapons and acquiring ammunition, and maybe, I need a little more facts here, but maybe he suggested he didn't like Trump, he didn't like politicians or something like that, I could see a better case being made for the prosecution.
Now I'm going to move on to another point. Did Crooks act alone? Did he have help? Was there a second shooter? The reason this has come up, or one of the reasons, is because Catalin Gregoris, director of the National Center for Media Forensics at the University of Colorado in Denver, and Cole Whitecotton, senior professional research associate at the same institution, they analyzed audio of the shooting, and they concluded that the first 3 shots were consistent with alleged weapon A, the next 5 were consistent with alleged weapon B, and the final acoustic impulse was emitted by a possible weapon C. And the audio also confirms that the shooter was on a rooftop about 393 to 492 feet away. Now, some have said, is that weapon C from another shooter? Was it another Secret Service sniper? And according to the Washington Post, 2 audio experts, Rob Mayer of Montana State University and Stephen Beck of Beck Audio Forensics, counted a total of 10 gunshots. So the first 8 shots had similar acoustic characteristics. They were fired within 6 seconds. Then there was a 9th shot from an apparent different area, and 16 seconds later there was a 10th shot. Now the last 2, they say, had different audio characteristics from the first 8, but they also say that audio in and of itself can't tell you exactly where the shots come from. There is something to note about this, though, and as Fox News reported, there is that photo of the pair of U.S. Secret Service counter snipers. They aren't the ones who apparently killed the gunman. There were 4 counter sniper teams that day, and this other team had neutralized the shooter, and apparently a member of local law enforcement had also engaged the shooter, seeming to mean that this local marksman had fired a shot. So with that, here once again is former SWAT team member Chad Ayers talking about this concept of, was Crooks acting alone?
Yeah, I can understand where people are coming from on this, but obviously the audio acoustics, it can do strange things. We've all been in baseball stadiums when fireworks go off, or obviously I've been involved in deadly force encounters and shootings multiple times in my career. The echo, the ricochet. Now, keep in mind, a lot of what we are hearing as outsiders, there's microphones involved all over that stage, so we're hearing different delays and things like that. As I have watched this video, I mean, Jesse, it seems like 1,000 times by now. Yes, I feel like it's consistent with the initial fire from the shooter, taking his rounds, followed by the counter sniper team's rifles. And then likely that last one they are hearing is the locals counter sniper taking that shot that the DA's reported that gentleman's been placed on leave. Also, the sound aspect, right? You might have a mixture of these counter sniper guys who have suppressors on their rifles, which I would assume many of them do. Your local counter sniper may not have had a suppressor on his rifle, so you're going to get different audios through that feed. But again, at the end of the day, I am confident we are still working with one shooter and multiple law enforcement shooters.
But it's not just that, because there was reporting from a former classmate of Crooks that he had failed to make the school's rifle team back in the day because he was such a bad shot. So does it make sense that Crooks was able to take that shot? Wouldn't that be really difficult? Also, I mentioned all of the explosives and the bomb-making materials. A 20-year-old guy, no criminal history. How does he know how to do this? No help? Well, I asked Chad Ayers about this, and I asked also, once again, Bobby Chacon, former FBI agent. Let's hear what they had to say.
He's proned out. He's laying out. He's stabilized that rifle. I could take my 5-year-old nephew, and in about 20 minutes, I could lay him behind that rifle, steady it, tell him to put it on this target, pull the trigger, and it's going to go there. It is not a tough shot whatsoever, especially with a 5.56 caliber assault rifle. Very easy. I know we mentioned it Monday. I am looking forward to knowing what type of scope he had. Was it a magnified type of scope? Was it a red dot? What was that? Not that it changes a lot, but it does change a little bit. But at the end of the day, whether it's a good shot or not, the only reason former President Trump is alive today is because he turned his head, period. Think about a lot of these mass shootings are school shootings, right? You've got 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds that carry out the most heinous crimes ever. These crimes 100% can be committed by a solo person without any help at all.
I mean, our guys are digging into it. Our forensic examiners, our computer forensic examiners are good at that. So, if he was able to use, this was a young man, he knows computers. He's of the age that he grew up with them. And so, if he was using some kind of, dark web to hide his search histories and stuff, our guys usually find that stuff. And so hopefully something like that happens, because I don't know where I mean, unless you somehow got a hold of a bomb making manual, and I don't know how you do that either. Obviously, stuff's readily available on the internet, which leads a trail. If you're not finding that trail, I don't know how a 20-year-old young man without prior military training or any kind of training would know to get those things and how to even crudely assemble them.
Now, I do have to mention this as well, that it is being reported that at the time of Crooks' death, he was wearing a T-shirt from Demolition Ranch, which is a YouTube channel, has 11 million subscribers. It apparently features videos of guns and explosive devices. So was there something from there that he was able to learn how to do all this? But I will tell you, and this is important to note, that the founder of Demolition Ranch, Matt Carricker, released a statement saying they were shocked and confused to find this out. No matter what side you're on politically, none of us want violence. This channel was never meant to incite violence or hate. And what is also interesting as we think about whether or not Crooks had communicated with anyone is that apparently Crooks had 2 cell phones. Yeah, there was one that was found near his body, and there was a second phone located at his home back in Bethel Park that had reportedly just 27 contacts on it. So if this reporting is true, I imagine investigators are going to track down those people. So let's go back to how this happened. How was a 20-year-old able to expose these vulnerabilities that day? Why were there vulnerabilities? Great question, right? Well, there are apparently multiple investigations happening right now. We know we have the FBI regarding the shooting, looking into the shooter. But we also have multiple investigations that have been opened up by the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General, looking into the security of the event, the planning, the counter-sniper team's preparedness. And Congress is also jumping in as well. In fact, Director of the Secret Service, Ms. Cheeto, she will be testifying next week in front of the House Oversight Committee. And here once again is Charles Marino, former Secret Service agent, on what we can expect from these investigations, especially what we can expect might happen with the Secret Service director.
It's no surprise that at the DHS level, we're now seeing the Inspector General get involved. They will conduct their own independent investigation. And then you also have the hearings of Congress that we spoke of, but you also have calls by Congress for now an independent commission. So you could have essentially 3-4 simultaneous investigations going on. The big thing is how quickly do these investigations move? Because the longer this stays out there, the more the conspiracy theories gain traction. So it's important for all of these investigations to move very quickly, but the Secret Service will not be allowed, as much as they may want to, and they've already been told to stand down, from looking at themselves and assessing themselves. They are now at the mercy of 3-4 external mechanisms to investigate the agency.
But in terms of putting a spotlight on the Secret Service from these multiple different investigations, what could happen?
Well, first, they're going to look at what went wrong. They're going to look at the operational security plans, the number of agents that were there, the number of Secret Service uniform division officers, how many special operations teams were there, counter snipers, counter assault team. Were they purely Secret Service teams, or were they a hybrid where Secret Service was married up with state and local resources? Like we're hearing, how many police officers from what jurisdictions were requested to come in and support that outer perimeter area? So that visit itself is going to be under a microscope to look at what went wrong there. That's one area they're going to look at. Then they're going to start looking at more systemic things. What are the hiring practices of the Secret Service? This director happens to be very big in DEI. She implemented a program called the 30 for 30 campaign when she became director. That is, she wants the Secret Service workforce to have 30% females by the year 2030. The big question is going to be, in order for her to meet that quota that she put in place, had she lowered standards throughout the agency? So naturally, they're going to then go on to training Is training still the world-class training that it was when I went through? And they're going to look at operations. They're going to look at resources. And this is where the Department of Homeland Security comes into the conversation. Is the Department of Homeland Security giving the Secret Service the resources that it needs to carry out their zero-fail mission?
Director Cheadle, there are calls for her to resign. A, do you think she will resign? Do you think that's the right call for her to resign? What's your take on it? And if she doesn't resign, could she be fired? And how could she be fired? What's the protocol there?
So I don't think she'll resign. She has said she has no intention on resigning. Yes, she can be fired. She is a presidential appointee, non-confirmed by the Senate. So it would likely be a joint decision between her immediate boss, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the President of the United States. What I think is the focus now needs to be on the U.S. Secret Service. The agency has to come out of this stronger than before this situation took place. They need to make sure that they have everything that they need to do their job, as I already said. And I think at this point in time, it can't be about the individual, the director, who has already come out and made too many statements that just fly in the face of common sense. So I think it's undercut the credibility of the agency enough. I think the attention has been too much on her, and I think it really needs to be on the agency right now to make sure that they're able to do their important job, not just for the people they protect, but ultimately for democracy.
All right, so that is what we have right now. This story is evolving. This story is changing. We are getting new information. This is what we have right now, but of course, we will continue to follow the latest in this shooting that should never have happened. That is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.